We all want to be healthier, but it takes work and research and discipline. So when we come across something that makes it easy, we tend to lean toward that option. When organic foods became popular, we flocked to them because that's an easy decision to make and the store requires very little brain power. But is it really what we think it is? And is it worth the extra cost? Skeptic comedian David C. Smalley is here to discuss it and probably ruin organic foods for the rest of us.
It's like you know me or something. I don't know what's going on.
I mean, most people think organic foods are automatically better for you, better for the environment, pesticide-free. I know that's what I thought. I thought that was the point. More nutrient-dense, there's less pollution, they don't spray stuff on them, and that's why it's more expensive. But since you're covering it here, I'm going to guess that at least one of those things is not true at all.
Or all of them.
All of them. Okay.
Maybe. Let's dive in.
Yeah, let's dive in.
In 2002, when the USDA released its national standards for organic products, sales spiked by 20%. To give you an idea, it typically only goes by about 3% per year. So the fact that it jumped by 20% means you're exactly right. At the very least, people believe it's better, so they justify spending that extra money.
It sounds like they got one of those $100 million PR boosts where all the crappy fake journalists who are writing for magazines are like, turns out organic food is way better for you. And it made the rounds and went viral and switched a bunch of people over, a bunch of yummies.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. So what qualifies a farm to be organic in the first place? I know they got to be certified and all that stuff.
Yeah, well, maybe. So Consumer Reports published an article called Farmers Market Produce Local versus Organic.
Sounds fascinating.
The things I read for you, Jordan.
That's a page turner.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't put it down. It was incredible. Kept me up at night. I was wondering what was going to happen next. Where's the corruption going to start? It was amazing. Here's what they say. In order to call your produce organic, you, the farmer, have to be certified by the USDA. Now, that comes from Joe Masabny, PhD. He's a vegetable specialist at the Texas A&M AgriLife Research and Extension Center in Overton. He says this. He goes, there's paperwork to fill out, there's processes to follow, and you have to be approved.
Spoken like a vegetable expert. Yeah.
But a certification agency accredited by the Department of Agriculture checks that the farm is complying with those organic standards once a year. The exception is farmers with yearly sales of less than $5,000 do not need to be certified, but can still use the term organic.
Aha. So if you're hipster enough, you could be going so farm to table that you could be just ingesting a ton of chemicals that aren't regulated by the USDA.
Yes. So technically, small farmers could be less organic than non-organic, but still slap the organic label on their food, and you'd never know it because they don't have to follow the organic standards.
I'm way too cheap and too skeptical to buy organic, so this is sort of good schadenfreude news for people like me, but at the same time, I kind of can't wait to hear the standards.
So this is the statement by the USDA. Okay, I'm going to read it, and it definitely sounds like it was written by a team of people who love meetings and circling back to touch base like
just
that
poking
group.
My head in here on this one.
Yeah, just circling back. We'll touch base next week. It's a meeting about a meeting, that group. Listen to the wording here. Organic producers use natural processes and materials when developing farming systems. These contribute to soil, crop, and livestock nutrition, pest and weed management, attainment of production goals, and conservation of biological diversity. It sounds like orientation for like farmer's market, right? Or like Sprouts when you're getting ready to work there. So to most people, that probably sounds amazing, but to listeners of this podcast, you recognize that as corporate horseshit.
Yes, there were definitely attorneys in the room, project managers in the room, all involved in the crafting of that masterpiece.
Absolutely. So 95% of people who buy organic foods, when surveyed, say they buy organic to avoid pesticides. Now, is that
sounds
do
legit.
You believe that there? I mean, when you hear organic, do you think no pesticides?
I thought that was the point.
Most
or they
people
spray,
do.
I don't know, they spray essential oils on there instead of pesticides and it does the same thing. I don't really know.
Aromatherapy, Jordan. They do aromatherapy for the squash. So if you're one of those people, don't feel bad. They got most of us. Here's the uncomfortable fact of the day. Organic farms still use pesticides. The Scientific American reports There are over 20 chemicals commonly used in the growing and processing of organic crops that are approved by the U.S. organic standards, including copper sulfate, alcohols, chlorine products, hydrogen peroxide, and even soaps.
So all these people thinking they're eating non-pesticide treated foods are just gnawing on chlorine in blissful ignorance.
Right. You know what non-pesticide treated food looks like? I mean,
I'm going to hazard a guess and say it probably looks like it's been eaten by a bunch of pests.
right. It wouldn't make it to the table in the first place. And in the effort of being natural, so many things get overlooked. The Scientific American published a study on a natural pesticide called rotenone. Rotenone was widely used in the US as an organic pesticide for decades. And this is what they write in the article. Because it's natural in origin, occurring in the roots and stems of a small number of subtropical plants, it was considered safe as well as organic, because after all, it's natural.
Mhm.
However, research showed that rotenone is highly dangerous because it kills the insects by attacking mitochondria. And
The
we all
powerhouse
remember
of the cell.
we all attended seventh grade, so we know that that's the powerhouse of all living cells. So research found that exposure to rotenone caused Parkinson's disease-like symptoms in rats and has the potential to kill many species, including humans.
So the organic standards, they do allow you to be killed by things as long as they're killing you naturally.
Bingo. It
Fair.
definitely seems that way. That specific one, I will say, was discontinued in 2005.
Oh, good.
But for
So
some
I only
reason,
ate it for 25 years then. I'm
roughly.
fine.
Yeah, roughly. But somehow it was reapproved in 2010 with limited use.
Okay.
And right now, I tried to find as much as I could for it right now. It's listed as available yet restricted. So I'm honestly confused as to what that even means or how that one is even allowed application. I did find that they do pour it into some fisheries to keep insects out of the water because even bugs aren't dumb enough to volunteer for brain diseases, apparently.
I want to be in the meeting when the guy says, "Hey, man, we should dump bug poison into the water to keep the fish safe."
Right. Not a single person at the meeting is going to be like, should we still eat those fish? And somebody's like, yeah, we can eat the fish. Poison kills the insects, stupid. I mean,
Yeah.
let's just back up and think about how terrible this is. So the specific organic standards are long and complicated. There's a whole website dedicated to it. There's a bunch of different sections. But to give you an example of one that I found, one standard specifically says the use of GMOs is prohibited in organic products. This means an organic farmer can't plant GMO seeds, an organic cow can't eat GMO alfalfa or corn, and an organic soup producer can't use any GMO ingredients, end quote. That is directly from the USDA website on organic standards. This is such horseshit. I'm sorry, cow shit. Because what is a cow, Jordan? What is a cow? One of the times I had the honor of having Neil deGrasse Tyson on my podcast, he yelled to our live audience in Omaha, Nebraska. He goes, "The cow is a GMO. It doesn't exist in nature. We made the cow through genetic modifications." So the USDA saying the phrase organic cow just doesn't make sense unless you call an organic cow a cow that doesn't eat products that they've determined or labeled as a GMO. And it turns out that's exactly how they define an organic cow.
Oh, that's
and
so
then,
weird.
And then they add to it that an organic cow can't have any hormones or antibiotics, even if they get sick. But in accordance with federal law, here's the thing: all meat, all poultry, all dairy sold in the US has to be free of antibiotic residues, whether or not the food is labeled antibiotic free.
Okay. So since my parents and grandparents theoretically decided to breed because they were deliberately selecting for certain traits, does that also make me a GMO?
You're definitely not organic.
No.
So I'm gonna say yeah. I'm gonna say you're a GMO. If they were selective in their breeding, I'm gonna go with that. But I'll get to that in just a bit. Actually,
I'm a little uncomfortable speculating on the sexual proclivities of my grandparents, and I
can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't want to eat me though. I've taken a shitload of antibiotics in my time. There's no way I meet that standard now. Okay, so if an animal gets sick on an organic farm, and they need antibiotics because those are, I mean, we have those, they're effective. They get rid of, I don't know, COVID or lung diseases and other things like that. What do they do with that animal?
Well, they're supposed to treat the animal with antibiotics and then move it to the non-organic herd,
Okay.
but that's not always the case.
So farmers are raising both organic animals and non-organic farm animals on the same farm?
Right, they can. It's not all of them do, but they can. So plants are the same way. So there can be organic crops and non-organic crops on the same farm. In fact, I toured some farms in Iowa a few years ago, and there were people that I visited who literally had like a strip of conventional crops, and then they would be like, "This is my organic soy, and this is my regular soy," and it just they're within feet of each other. They just, as long as they follow the USDA guidelines or don't get caught breaking the rules, it doesn't matter. It's more about the product than it is the farm specifically.
Okay, that makes sense. The whole concept of GMOs always did seem a little shady to me. Do they have a different definition other than the common sense understanding of genetically modified?
Nope.
Huh.
The USDA defines a GMO as an organism produced through genetic modification.
Okay, that's
It's really
vague.
that simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's so simple though. It's just, what is genetic modification? What does it mean to modify the genes? So it's essentially the human intervention of selective crossbreeding plants to get the best of both worlds, or adding or removing genes, even in a lab, to help with natural problems. So there's a website called GMO Answers, and they have a video of a guy named Kevin Folta. He's the associate professor in the horticulture sciences department at the University of Florida. And he describes in this video his way of interpreting what genetic modification is. He says, think of it as precision crossbreeding, where you take something that has tremendous elite qualities in terms of traits. Maybe it has an excellent ability to be shipped or stored or great flavor quality, but it has some problem with disease susceptibility. And maybe by adding one gene, you could solve that problem. With something like an apple tree, he says you could save 50 years of natural breeding through one single gene. And then he goes on to say that 70% of the products in your store are GMOs.
Hey, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There's a lot more just like this. You can find the Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, back to the show. I always thought genetically modified something, they go in there and they're cutting the DNA and the whole thing is like the first ones are lab grown and then they sell you the modified version. I just thought it was way more complicated than, oh, I wanted the bigger strawberries. So I found the big strawberries growing on this one and the big strawberries growing on that one. And I put them together. And that's
Yeah,
what that is.
no, yeah, it's just that simple.
Yeah.
It's selective crossbreeding and perhaps maybe replacing a gene or two here and there, and it works out for the better. The whole idea of a have you seen the uh, what do they call them? Orangelos? They're like
No. What's
half
that?
grape. It's half grapefruit, half orange.
Oh,
So
I bet
if you
that's
like,
delicious.
I mean, if you like oranges but also want it to be disgusting, I hate grapefruit. You can
I'm one
go
of
with
those
that.
weirdos who as a kid, of course, hated grapefruit like most normal people. But now that
Oh,
I'm older, I'm like, ooh, I want to suffer when I eat breakfast. So
it's
I
so
eat it.
gross.
I
By the
will
way,
eat.
don't ever mix your antibiotics with grapefruit.
I heard didn't I read that or is it heart medication? Like you can't take grapefruit and heart medication. There was something you can't
Just
take it with.
just do your research, people. If you're eating grapefruit and you're
DYR.
into it, yeah, it can be dangerous. Not only is it disgusting, I think it kills people.
Oh,
So
fair enough. Well,
read up.
just when you thought grapefruit couldn't get any worse. 70% is a lot of
Yeah.
products in the store that are GMO. So even people vehemently against GMOs are very likely just shoveling that stuff into their shopping cart at the store without even knowing it. And I guess that means that even if the modification makes them healthier and last longer, it's no longer considered organic. So it's restricted and deemed less healthy by organic standards.
Welcome to the backwards world of government nutrition funded by billionaires.
Sheesh.
When you bite a watermelon and you don't get a mouthful of seeds, it's because to produce a seedless watermelon, there's a chemical process used to double the number of chromosomes. So 22 chromosomes are doubled to 44. It's called a tetraploid. Then the pollen from a diploid is placed on the female flower of the plant with 44 chromosomes, and that's how you get no seeds. It doesn't reproduce itself. So there's nothing wrong with that. And even the USDA says, and this is a quote from their website, some GMO plants contain plant incorporated protectants, or PIPs, to make them resistant to insects, reducing the need for spray pesticides. As another safety measure, the EPA works with developers and scientists to develop GMOs that will resist insects for as long as possible through their insect resistance management program.
Tetraploids. Sounds delicious. But saving time and using less pesticides and being more productive, that usually is not something the government will stand idly by and let happen.
Right.
So GMOs don't seem to be this scary monster that they're made out to be. I mean, who doesn't love a seedless tetraploid watermelon here? But also, if we can make foods that don't need a bucket of Roundup every year, maybe that's better than the alternative. Are organic foods at least healthier, more nutrient dense in any way at all? Is there freaking meat on this bone? Organic meat on this bone?
Organic meat. So you're right. I mean, a lot of the environmental issues that we have with conventional farming are actually solved with GMOs. They genetically modify things to last longer, have a better shelf life, to taste better, to have more nutrients, to not get damaged in shipping with like tougher skins. It's a good process. It is a good process. But when you hear genetically modified, especially if you're extra natural and into crystals and super wooey, you're like, man, I don't want chemicals in my food. It doesn't mean they're injecting your watermelon with chemicals. It means there's a chemical process that allows the production to be different. It's the reproductive process that's chemical, not the actual fruit. So it can get scary. And as far as health goes, there is absolutely zero evidence for organic foods being overall healthier than conventional foods. There are some differences. Conventional crops tend to have higher nitrogen levels, while organic ones have higher phosphorus and acidity, but none of those result in more nutritional quality. I looked at study after study after study. They say that it's better for the environment. They say that it's healthier to put natural things in your body, but ask that for people who are suffering with brain diseases from rotenone. That's totally natural. That doesn't make any sense. So there was a recent study in the UK comparing different farms, and they found no differences in the makeup of over 15 different nutrients, including vitamin C, carotene, and even calcium. So no.
When I thought of GMOs, I was thinking of, like I said, gene splicing, but also big companies like Monsanto suing farmers into oblivion for using a seed that they didn't buy that had a license on it. You know, you see this sort of corporate big agriculture stuff that just ruins people for no good reason. And that's kind of where I had placed a lot of this stuff. Is organic farming is it better for the environment?
So the idea is supposed to be that it's better for the soil and the reproduction aspect. But the thing is, anytime something gets popular, giant corporations get involved.
Yeah.
And when giant corporations get involved, they cut corners, they mass produce, they do everything they can to maximize shareholder profits, which usually means minimizing cost and overpricing things. And they have, of course, done this to the organic food market. So factory organic farms, which is the vast majority of organic foods out there, they use their own cocktail of chemicals. They're still damaging to the environment. They refuse to endorse technologies that might reduce or eliminate the use of these altogether, like GMOs, right? These big corporate entities that are pro-organic are the ones funding things to make people afraid of things like GMOs. Because if we look at GMOs or genetically modified organisms to be something positive and healthy, then the organic market is going to suffer and people are going to realize that they're being screwed in the market. So they're going to lose billions. So they fund a lot of stuff that makes it look dangerous to eat things that are genetically modified, and they make it sound scary. ZME Science reports on a recent study that found that because agriculture or organic agriculture is now done mostly by these big corporations instead of local producers like when it first started, and the yields are lower, combined with intensive use of machinery, means that overall, in terms of emissions and pollution, organic agriculture is actually becoming worse than smaller conventional farms.
So what about the labels themselves? I've done shows on greenwashing and things where the certifications are kind of BS, but is there some inspection process they have to be approved for? You mentioned the USDA goes to the farms, but is that how rigorous are we talking about a lot of these places?
Yeah, so they go to the farms only once a year.
Right.
And the Washington Post published an article titled Five Myths About Organic Food, where they note that the inspection process for products labeled organic is often superficial and it's fraught with inconsistencies and potential conflicts of interest. They go on to say that the official USDA certificates guaranteeing that a product is organic are relatively easy to forge. And because the organic rules are designed for larger scale commercial operations, those mom and pop farm stands may be exempt from inspection. So, whether food really meets organic standards is really a matter of trusting the farms or the producers. So, again, one of these self-policing situations comes up on Skeptical Sunday where you're like that industry is supposed to police themselves. We hope they're doing the best, because corporations always do the right thing.
Right, of course. What about imported products labeled as organic? That's even scarier somehow because I assume if they're only checking the US farms once a year, are they ever checking the overseas farms that put the label on there? Or is it the same story?
So that same article I was referencing says that food labeled USDA organic that originates outside the United States is supposed to meet US standards. But the same potential problems come up in confronting those domestic certification issues, and they're exacerbated when food is imported because employees of third party certifiers rarely travel overseas to make those inspections. Instead, the certifiers contract with local firms operating in those source countries
Oh, man.
to try to trust them to police people in their own country. And then, of course, they add that these firms are often what they call rife with corruption.
At this point, rife with corruption just could have been the show title for the entire podcast, or at least this segment of the show. What is not rife with corruption these days? Okay, so we can't guarantee anyone is following the rules at all, but assuming that they did, let's just pretend that they actually follow the rules. Is organic farming at least better for the farm animals?
Well, no. I was going to be hopeful for a moment. It's
Brutal.
not. In one study reported by the Farmer's Almanac, research showed that among pig farmers, up to 25% of pigs on organic farms had pneumonia, compared to only 4% of pigs on conventional farms. And piglets on organic farms died twice as often.
Oh, that's depressing. I guess it makes sense. They can't get any medicine without getting demoted to the non-organic part of the farm. And that's if the farm that they're on even has that in the first place. Otherwise, they got to get sold or given away or something, which is
Right.
talk about a chunk in your profit margin.
Exactly. Or they're going to be sold for cheaper because they're no longer considered organic.
Right.
And that's a real concern. I mean, if they do get treated with medicine, they have to be pulled out of the lineup. They won't be used at all, or they won't make as much money. So it benefits the organic farmer to just tell the pig to walk it off.
Ugh. So that organic label is essentially meaningless from the sound of it.
Well, it doesn't mean something is 100% organic. That's another issue. The current minimum, according to the USDA, is something has to be 70% organic,
Huh?
and the company has to make more than $5,000 a year on organic foods in order to use the label.
That's
So
confusing.
I don't even know what 70% organic means unless it's genetically modified, which would mean it's not organic anyway.
But
So,
like an animal can't be 70% organic.
right.
If you've given it the well, he was only on medicine 10% of his life, so he's organic now.
He's 90%. He's 90% organic. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really make sense. So, I'd say, I mean, even the word organic itself is iffy at this point because these labels that they're sticking on, we don't know if they're being fact checked. We don't know how often they're checking. They say once a year, but it's easy to forge. So, I'd say organic as a label, at the very least, is untrustworthy. I wouldn't call it meaningless, but I would definitely say it's untrustworthy, and it probably doesn't mean what most people think it means. So it's definitely not worth the extra cost, in my opinion. I skip over the organic stuff out of principle, and I actually watch the register as I'm checking out to make sure they don't accidentally charge me for organic produce, since most of the codes have to be entered manually on produce. So whatever minimal benefits do come from having an organic farm, it doesn't seem worth it to this skeptic. And I'd rather trust science and advancements in technology personally.
Thanks, David. Well, you have made me hungry, so I'm going to go have a fish marinated in some rotenone water and an organic baked potato lathered in chlorine peroxide and maybe some fresh seedless tetraploids for dessert. What do you think?
Man, sounds amazing. Let's do it.
Yeah, all organic, of course.
Of course.
Thanks for checking out this entire episode of The Jordan Harbinger Show. If you're interested in exploring this topic further, check out the Jordan Harbinger Show podcast feed. There, we dive even deeper on this and many other topics. In the audio podcast, I also close open loops, cover things discussed off camera, off air, and give some parting lessons from our guest. You can find The Jordan Harbinger Show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, any podcast app, or at jordanharbinger.com. And also, if you found this episode useful, please share it with those you care about. Last but not least, like, comment, and subscribe.